could not be more excited. I could not be more excited to be launching into a new series today on David. Now, here's why I'm excited about this, because David is this real, raw story of a person pursuing faith. And I assume that the reason everybody is here, everybody's joining us online, everybody at the Monroe campus, I imagine the reason we're all here is because we have a little bit of faith. It may not be very much faith, but it's a little bit of faith, and we're pursuing to look like what that is more. I want to tell you, if you want more faith, then you have to understand the life of David. He is one of the top 3 characters outside of Jesus that you need to know everything about. So we're going to make that really easy for you. We have a way for you to subscribe to a reading plan. If you get out your phones with me, what we want you to do is we want you to text 555-888, and we want to text we want you to text King David to 555-888, okay? So just if you haven't done this before, what you're going to want to do is instead of texting your mom or your girlfriend or whoever that is right here in this section, you're going to type in 555-888, and in the message section, you're going to type in King David, all one word, okay? And what you're going to get is you're going to get a weekly reading plan. So whether you're doing that here today, whether you're doing it in Monroe, got your phones out in Monroe, or you're online watching this at whatever date, just go ahead and subscribe, pull out your phone, and text 555-888, and you're going to text the word King David, all one word. What you're going to get is a weekly update that's going to give you 7 days of a reading plan. We're going to go through 1 and 2 Samuel for 4 weeks. Now, while you're doing that, while you've got your phones out, because some of you forgot where your phone is, it's fine. You pull that out. We're going to leave this up here for a second. While you're subscribing to that, why this is so important is because there's so much in the life of David that you will never hear. Yeah, you'll hear the story of David and Goliath here and there. You'll hear about adulterous relationship with Bathsheba here and there. But there is so much. There are 2 whole books in the Old Testament devoted just to the life of David. It is rich and it is real, and if you are sincerely wanting to grow and understand your faith, this reading will be so much better than listening to me talk, okay? So make sure you subscribe to this and go through 1 and 2 Samuel this week. So, as you're doing that, as some of you are wrapping up, texting King David to 555-888, I want to tell you why this is so important. Because David was unique, because God paid David a compliment. He didn't do this very often, but he paid people very unique compliments. Moses, he said he was the most humble person that's ever lived. Jesus said about John the Baptist that he was the greatest person on earth at the time. That's a pretty high compliment. David had this very unique thing that has echoed for thousands of years, and we have just kind of contemplated. God said of David that he was a man after God's own heart. That isn't something I said. That isn't something we made up. That's what God said about David. He said, he, more than any other man, emulates my heart. That's a pretty big compliment. And what we're going to do in this series is we're going to try to figure out what does that mean, because we know it doesn't mean that David was perfect and righteous and holy all the time. Because as you go through, because you texted 555-888, you texted King David to that, when you do that, what you're going to find as you read through this passage of Scripture that David had arrogance, David was sinful, David messed up and tried to cover it up, and there were some big mistakes that David made in his life. So it doesn't mean a man after God's own heart. That doesn't mean that David was perfect. And we're going to discover what it really means. And what I believe is it's obtainable for you. You can be a man or a woman after God's own heart. And as we jump into this story, what's achievable and what's attainable is to look at it and go, this is who God is calling you and I to be. So, how we start with David is actually we have to start with somebody altogether different. We're not even going to start by talking about David. We're going to start with a guy named Saul. Okay, Saul is a really important figure. He is what you've got to understand in order to understand David. In fact, for the majority of the second half of 1 Samuel and all of 2 Samuel, you see there's compare and contrast between David and Saul. Compare and contrast between David and Saul. And Saul has one kind of heart, and David has a different kind of heart. So we're going to spend some time talking about Saul today, and then we're going to get to David also. So, introduction to Saul. Here's what you need to know. Saul was the first king in Israel, like the first king ever. They had existed for a nation. Imagine this. They had existed for a nation for almost 500 years. Twice as long, or more than twice as long as we've been a nation, they existed as a nation, and they didn't have a king. That's crazy. You know what I mean? That's amazing. And what happened was God had this unique governance system where he would just sort of raise up leaders as needed. And at certain times, when there were certain leaders needed, he would raise them up. But there was no specific king. Well, the Israelites didn't like that, so they cried out to God, and they're like, God, give us a king, give us a king, give us a king. And God was like, okay, I'm going to give you what you want. It's not what you want. It's not really what you want, but I'm going to give it to you because you are asking me for it. And they said, we don't, and really what they were doing is they were rejecting God. And they were saying, we don't want you to lead us. We want a king, and we want him to be big and strong and awesome. Now, you might think, stupid Israelites, right? We do that. We get really invested in leaders. They're a backup plan because our faith isn't strong enough. The election time rolls around, and we think that the fate of the universe somehow is in the hands of the president. And we call him the most powerful person in the world. And we don't have enough faith to realize that that is not the most important thing. I mean, elections are smart and good, and you should vote and be educated and all that. But come on. God is king, and he will always be king. And when we get invested in who the leaders are, it is a lack of faith on our part. And then, let me get this really locally for you. We do this in the church. We are like, oh yeah, God, we want to follow you. And if you could just give me a charismatic, good-looking, strong pastor to follow, then I'll go to that church. And we know that's why you're all here. And so we put this, we say, God, we want to follow you, but we need you to be embodied in this person. And yes, we want you to pick this pastor or this person, but we want to follow you, but we kind of want to follow you through this person. And so here's what I'll tell you. I know this. I am God's backup plan. God would love it for us to all just put our faith in him and follow him personally, faithfully. He would love it, but because he knows that you won't text 555-888 King David and read the Bible for yourself, you're stuck with me. I'm the backup plan. And Saul was the backup plan too. So God asked for a king, and he said, we're going to follow after this king. And God said, well, here you go, and here's your king. So this is all you need to know about Saul. It's a very short passage. When you get to this in your reading, you're going to get to this, and it's really quick, but don't miss it. It's Saul's inauguration day. Saul knows that he is going to be inaugurated, and so what they do is they gather hundreds of thousands of Israelites all together. The entire nation is together, and they say, okay, we're going to select them. And so they go to God, and they say, okay, what tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel, what tribe is the new king coming from? And the selection is the tribe of Benjamin. So here's just imagine this. If all of a sudden we found out that the next president or something, you don't even know who it is, it's a surprise, and they come in and announce, the next president is going to be from, drum roll please, Michigan. We'd be like, yeah, Michigan. We don't know if he's a Republican, a Democrat, a conservative, but he's from Michigan. And we just stupidly follow people from Michigan. That's why you fools like Tom Brady. So anyway, I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. He's a patriot. I can't like him. Anyway, so no, we're going to be excited because it's like, man, Michigan, yeah. That's what the tribe of Benjamin was. They were like, oh my goodness, it's our tribe. We got picked. And then they go, okay, now we're going to go to a specific clan inside the tribe. And so they go down to this clan, and so the clan gets named, and they're like, it's our clan. And then in the clan, they name the family. And so again, all of Israel is looking, the clan, the tribe, the nations, they're all clapping, they're cheering, who's going to be the first king in Israel? And they boil it all the way down to Saul's family, right? Saul, his name, last name, we're not, doesn't have a last name. Let's call them the Johnsons. So the Johnsons get selected, right? And here they are, they're to be named, and they say it's going to be somebody in that family, and so they're like, it's one of us. And they look around, they're like, who's it going to be? And then they go, and the name is Saul. And they're like, Saul, of course, because Saul's like a foot taller than everybody else, right? He'll be a great king. So they look around, and everybody's cheering, and no Saul, nowhere to be found. And they're like, he was here a minute ago. And here's what they found out. And here's how they found it out. This is the best part. They go to God. And they had a process in which they would ask God questions. And they asked God, they're like, where's Saul? Some people are probably like, he's probably already killing our enemies. He's out there fighting an army all by himself, right? He's like, where's Saul? And God goes, He's hiding in the luggage. And they were like, oh yeah, I don't know if God makes jokes, but they're like, yeah, no, really, he's hiding. What Saul had done is he had showed up on his inauguration day, he got scared, he was terrified, and so he hid himself in the baggage. And they went and they uncovered it, and they pulled him out, and he stood up, and they brought him out, and they said, hey, here's your new king, and he walked out, and he was like, hey, guys, yeah. And I just can't imagine what that was like. I don't know if everybody was like, oh, yeah. I don't know if this is a good start. What is this right here? So he comes out and they appoint him king. Now that's who you need to know. This is who Saul is. Now, as you're reading through, you'll find out that in 1 Samuel 13, God does some amazing stuff in Saul's life. He changes his heart. The Holy Spirit comes on him, and he kind of appoints him as king. But then Saul in 1 Samuel 13 is faced with a critical moment. You have faced critical moments in your life. You know what these feel like. These moments where it's like, I've been learning and growing, and there's different characters in my life, and it seems like there's a good guy and a bad guy, and I know right from wrong, and there's something good happening in me, but there's something bad happening in me at the same time, and it all sort of leads up to a critical moment. You know what I'm talking about? You've been in this place. And I think God brings us to these critical moments for a reason. And God leads Saul up to this critical moment, and he puts him in a situation, and then he just kind of steps back. And you got to know, I believe God does this in our life. I've watched him do it in my life. I believe he's doing it in your life. He puts it all in play. He teaches us, he grows us, he matures us, he puts all these things in there, and he sticks us in this spot, and then he goes, okay, what are you going to do? What's your decision? What's going to happen now? And through that process, in that critical moment, in oftentimes a high-pressure situation, God discovers our heart. Or more importantly, we discover our heart. We discover what our heart is really made of. So, this is a critical situation for Saul. What I want to do is I want to show you Saul's critical situation, and then I want to compare and I want to contrast that with David's first critical situation. 1 Samuel 13 goes like this. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots. Now, you need to know chariots are like the tanks of the ancient world. Like, you got a chariot, it's worth 10 men. 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers. How many guys were with each chariot? Yeah, 2. I'll let you figure out the math. So anyway, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. In other words, Israel was outmanned and outgunned. And this was what happened. When the Israelites saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard-pressed, they hid, right? No courage. This is not necessarily an experienced group of soldiers. They hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks and in the pits and the cisterns. In fact, some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. In other words, they abandoned, they ran away. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. Just imagine this moment. You've got this huge army that you know you can't beat, and most of your troops have led, and there's some people that are looking to you. They're looking to you, they're quaking with fear, but they've stuck in there. They've got more courage than some of these other guys, and they're sticking in there, but they are scared. Here's what happened. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. Now, here's what this is. Samuel had given Saul very specific instruction. He says, you are not to attack. I'm going to give you 7 days, and when the 7 days are over, then I'm going to offer a sacrifice to God, and we're going to offer this sacrifice. We're going to invite God into the battle, and then we're going to move forward. That's what you're supposed to do. So that is Saul's critical moment. Wait 7 days with this army right in front of you and all your men scattering in fear. Now, you got to give it to Saul. He's going to be scared. Why wouldn't you be scared? There's an opportunity here to be filled with fear, and all of his men are filled with fear. So what Saul was supposed to do was wait. Now listen, you know how hard it is to wait, right? Have you ever had to wait? You know what it's like to wait? You know what it's like to be young and single and think to yourself, I'm never going to get married, right? I'm waiting for the right man, but I'm never going to get married. I'm 22. I'm never going to get married, right? You know what that's like? And so you start lowering your standards of men. That's how I got married, right? Because eventually, guys, if you're like me, you start looking pretty, you know what I mean? And so you just, you get afraid. You get sick of waiting. You get tired of waiting on God. You get tired of waiting. And so all of a sudden it begins to create a panic inside of you. You get tired of waiting on the money. You get tired of waiting on the job. You get tired of waiting for God to show you what you're doing and where you're going. And so there's this waiting, and it's so difficult. And it is at that moment that your heart begins to really shine through. And so here's what Saul does. He offers the sacrifice. Now, there's a couple reasons why that's wrong. One, because Samuel is very specific. Don't offer the sacrifice till I get back. But two, he just broke a major rule that has existed for 500 years. God very specifically said only one group of people gets to offer the sacrifice, and those are the priests. You have to be from a specific tribe. You have to be consecrated in a specific way, and you have to be an actual priest. There is no way on God's green earth that Saul was qualified or allowed to offer the sacrifice, but he was scared. He was terrified. And so he said, well, we got to have God's blessing. We can't go into the battle. Samuel's nowhere to be found. Who knows? He might have died. And so Saul offers the sacrifice. Moments later, we don't know if this is like an hour. We don't know if this is like literally 30 seconds. After Saul offers the sacrifice, which he never should have done, Samuel arrived. He just had to wait just a little bit longer, and everything would have been okay. But he went ahead in his fear and his anxiety, and he offered the sacrifice. And Samuel sees him, and the first thing out of Samuel's mouth, you idiot. He says, you have done a foolish thing, Samuel said. You have not kept the command the Lord God, your God gave you. If you had, here's the stakes. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. Not just this one battle, not just this one moment, but God would have established you forever. And we would have been up here not talking about King David, we would have been up here talking about King Saul, because he was a man after God's own heart. But because he was afraid, Saul gave in and broke the command of the Lord. But he says this is the extreme. Listen. But now your kingdom that you just got will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. Saul couldn't see what was at stake. And here's the thing. You and I often don't realize what's at stake. We don't see the bigger picture. We don't see all we see is the ramifications of the immediate moment, and we panic and we are stressed, and often we are motivated by that. One of the most important things we can do in this story is what I want to see is I want to look at what Saul's motivation was. You can understand a person's heart by understanding their motivation. Saul's motivation, it's obvious. Fear. He's afraid. When you get terrified, right and wrong, it kind of goes away. The lines get blurred. You begin to change how you approach, how you do things. When you are afraid, the real you, your real heart begins to come out, and you begin to oftentimes panic. And it's when we're afraid that we are often at our stupidest. And that's where Saul was. Now, I want to contrast that with our guy, our man of the hour, David. In 1 Samuel 17, we get a picture of David for the first time. And again, it's a critical moment, but it's a much different story. David, after this, Samuel actually leaves Saul, right? He says, your kingdom's been ripped out of your hands. He leaves. He goes over to David. he goes to appoint David as king. He goes to a guy named Jesse's house. This is where God told him to go. He goes to Jesse's house, and he looks at all of his sons, right? All of David's older brothers. And apparently all of them look like the Hemsworth brothers, right? Like Thor and the guy from, Catching Fire. Anyway, so they look like the Hemsworth brothers, and Samuel looks at him and goes, nope, nope. And God's like, nope, don't look at the outward man. I'm not looking at the outward man. I'm looking for the heart. And so they go through all of David's brother, and Jesse, David's dad, literally looks and goes, well, I'm out. I got nothing else. And he's like, are you sure you don't have any more kids? Like, what a weird question. Yeah, and the Hebrew word is actually this. And Jesse says, well, I have a nothing out in the field. That's what he means. He means he has an insignificant nothing out in the field watching his sheep. And Samuel's like, well, bring in the nothing. Let's have a look. And David comes in. And what's interesting about it is this whole story is built on the fact that God doesn't look on the outward appearance, right? But when it says when Samuel saw him, he saw that he was ruddy and good looking. Because it's the first thing he noticed, right? And so he wasn't big and he wasn't strong, but he was cute. So anyway, he's 16, he's ruddy, he's good looking, comes in, and God automatically identifies him and says, here's your guy. So he anoints him with oil, and he says, you're going to be king. And David's like, I'm going to be king? And Jesse's like, you're going to be king? And his brothers are like, you're going to be king? Yeah, he's going to be king. What do I do with that information? Because it's not like, here's the thing, it's not like they take him to the palace and put him on the throne and give him a scepter. And there's none of that. It's just Samuel's like, okay, you're going to be king, see ya. He walks away, and he's like, well, what do I do now? Then one day, Jesse sends David to the battle line. He sends him to the battle line with basically some groceries and his mom's brownies, right? And he sends him to the line. He says, I want you to give this to all your brothers that are at the battle line. So he goes to the battle, and the battle looks like this. Israel's on one side of a deep valley, and on the other side are all the Philistines. David goes up to his brothers, and he gives them a hug, and he gives them some brownies, and they're like, oh, yeah, it's good to see you, man. And while he's talking to his brothers, a Philistine comes into the valley and begins to shout blasphemies at the name of his God and against God's armies. And he is a giant. He's 9 feet tall, and he wasn't just tall. So he has a spear like a weaver's beam. So this was something that would have been very difficult to pick up. So he was broad. He was like, if you watch WW whatever, it's like the Big Show, except like 9 feet tall, right? So he's a huge, experienced battle-ridden guy with armor all over him, and he is shouting blasphemies at the armies of the living God. Now, whenever this would happen, he turned to his brothers and he said, what's this? And the brothers were like, oh yeah, he's been doing that. He's been coming out and he's been doing that every single day, calling out one person to come and fight him. Now listen, what do you think this was normal practice? It probably wasn't normal practice. Like, hey, listen, we'll have one fight and that'll determine the winner. No, he comes out and he pulls out. I think he did it for one reason, because they probably heard that Israel had a giant of their own, that they had a new king, and he was a foot taller than everybody else, right? So they're like, oh, you got a tall king, do ya? So they send Goliath out and they're like, bring out your king. But when Saul hears the blasphemies that this king is raising against his God, this is what it says. On hearing the Philistines' words, on hearing Goliath, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Because remember, that's where Saul lives. He's terrified. And he's calling out their giant, and they're all looking around for their giant, their new appointed king, and he's nowhere to be found. And David hears this whole story, and he puts it together, and he goes, okay, again, this is David's big critical moment. David asked, he said, the men standing near him, what will be done for the men who killed the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? He's like, well, first of all, nobody said disgrace, right? It's just a guy calling us out. And David's like, no, this is a straight up disgrace. This guy's coming out here. He's not mocking us. That's not my issue. He's mocking our God. How dare he? So he says, who's this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And nobody had a good answer. And so David then puts together a plan. He goes to Saul, and this is what he says. David said to Saul, Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. I got it. Now here's the deal. They brought David in there, and even his brothers called him cocky. His brothers were like, you're just cocky. You're just arrogant. You little twerp, right? It doesn't actually say that in the text, but they did call him arrogant. And David's like, no, I just know this shouldn't be. So he goes in. Everybody's like, okay, Saul, this kid wants to go fight Goliath. Go ahead and tell him no. And Saul's like, do you think you could win? You think you could win? You think you could do it? Okay. And so this is what Saul says. Saul says, go, and the Lord be with you. Good luck, buddy. Remember to keep your guard arm up, right? Yeah. So he sends him out to battle. He tries to put armor on him. It doesn't work. So David goes out with a slingshot. That's all he's got. He goes to the battle line, and Goliath sees it, and he's insulted. Goliath said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David's response, David said to the Philistine, didn't even hesitate. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. In other words, you called down the thunder, get ready for the lightning, or maybe it's the other way around. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. I love it. He is not even hesitating at this moment. And everybody's like, well, good to know you, David. Talk's a big game, right? This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that I'm great. No. Listen to his motivation. The whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. Listen, he said, all those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Now, what I love about it, it wasn't his confidence with his brothers. It wasn't just his confidence with Saul. It was standing in the presence of a 9-foot giant who is cursing at him with an army at his back. It wasn't just that. It was his physical demeanor. Watch this. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran. Like he couldn't wait to go kill this guy. He was so confident. David quickly ran toward the battle line to meet him. It says he, reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. You know what I love about that? Think about the physics of this. The stone hits you in the head. Don't you fall backwards? Really? I mean, it comes with 80 miles an hour rock in the forehead. You should fall backwards. And yet somehow he falls face down, bowing before David's God. He knocks him down. The part we don't tell about in stories is David goes over, he pulls Goliath's huge sword. We don't tell this to the kids. He chops off his head, he pulls it up, and he lifts it up, and he's like, ah! And then all of the nation of Israel is just so pumped, like they can't believe what's happening, that they all join together as one man and pursue an army that's bigger and stronger and mightier than them. They chase them down and they kill them all. And they win a victory for God. And it concludes this way. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. Now, that was David's critical moment. Two very tense situations with a lot of fear involved, and yet they handled it very differently. Let's go back to motivation. Saul's motivation was fear. You've been there. You've made decisions based on fear. You've isolated yourself because of fear. You know what that's like. What's David's motivation? Is the opposite of fear courage? No. The opposite of fear is not just to have courage and kind of remove fear, right? God gave us fear for a reason. That fear is always going to be there. The difference between fear, the opposite of fear, isn't courage, because we can't just do that on our own. We got to have courage, or we got to have something that's giving us courage. And for David, the opposite of fear is faith. He puts his faith in God. It wasn't just that he was more of a courageous person, that was just sort of built into his DNA. It's because he had such faith in God, and he said, God's going to win this day for me. So let me end you with one question today. Are you a Saul or a David? Two very different hearts, two very tense situations. Are you a Saul or a David? When you face things that terrify you, the thought of being alone for the rest of your life, not having money in your checking account, living your life without having a child, whatever that might be. Maybe it's confessing a sin that you have not confessed before. Maybe it's opening up about something. You know that God wants to be obedient in some way. Maybe it's sharing your faith. Maybe it's being one of those Jesus people, and that just freaks you out. There's something, I'm telling you, in faith, there is something that will scare you. And if you operate in fear, it will destroy you. It will eat you from the inside out. But if your motivation in everything is faith, if you're not focused on the ramifications where you're like, I'm just going to do what God called me to do it because God called me to do it and He's God, and you have boldness and you run quickly, you don't just kind of be like, okay, I'll go, and you sort of tiptoe on life, but you grab some stones and you run against what God's got in your life and you go for it. With that much faith, I want to tell you, you will see God show up, because that's the heart that God's looking for. Do you want to be gripped by fear? Or do you want to be a man or a woman after God's own heart? Let me pray for you. Father, I pray, Lord, that we would not be ruled by our fear, by our what-ifs. God, that we would not be Sauls, that our lack of faith drives our life, God, but that we would emulate that heart of David. God, that we would be bold. God, I pray for the people in this room who are here today. They're interested in you. They want to know you. They want to take that next step. God, I pray that you would fill them with a boldness to do what you are calling them in this moment to do. And I pray that in the power of Christ's name. Amen.